Hi, I'm State Representative Josh Cutler. Welcome to another edition of Cutler Corner. Great to be here on PAC TV, and I have a special guest this month who's a familiar face in the town of Hanson and soon to be a familiar face in the town of Duxbury. Joining me is Town Administrator Rene Read from the town of Hanson, who is going to be starting as a Duxbury Town Manager starting next month. Welcome, Rene. Great to have you.
Thank you very much, Josh.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Why don't you tell us, for our folks in Duxbury who may not know you as well, you are a Duxbury resident, tell us a little bit about your background and what you've been doing.
Well, for the last 3.5 years, I've been working for the town of Hanson as the town administrator. Prior to that, I worked for the town of Mashpee as the assistant town manager and the finance director. And before that, I had an experience for 5 years in Harwich as the assistant town administrator there. Even prior to that, I worked in Lancaster as a community development and planning director, and then I had about 4 years of different work experiences in Vermont working in municipal government up there.
Great. And tell us, for folks who may not be as familiar, there's a town administrator and town manager, and they sound very similar, but they're actually quite different roles. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
With town administrator, I report directly to the board and I make recommendations for them to act on. With the town manager, I still report directly to the board, but more of the decision making is made at that level. It's the difference between a CFO, sort of a chief financial officer as a town administrator, versus a CEO, which is the chief executive officer in the town manager role. That's the private sector analogy.
Very good. I want to talk about Duxbury in a second, but first I want you to share some of the things you've been done in Hanson. I know I've gotten to know you through my role and also my previous job through the paper, and I think you've really kind of not shaking things up, but really revolutionized the town in terms of really professionalizing it, bringing in some new practices, streamlining things. Tell us about what some of your most proud accomplishments are as a town administrator in Hanson.
Well, thank you for saying that, first of all. There are a number of things I'm really proud of. We've organized a tremendous financial team that prior to my arrival, they were certainly working together as a team, but in a different way. It was almost they weren't as cohesive as they are now. Right now, they're all firing on all cylinders, and they've got a great group of people over there. Another thing we did was present a measure to the voters to consider last town meeting to change the highway surveyor from elected to appointed, which was a critical component of the public safety and emergency operations.
Now, most towns have an appointed highway surveyor at this point, right?
Many do. In a town like Duxbury, you have a DPW, which is the Department of Public Works, so they put everybody under one roof. But in this case, the highway surveyor had been elected for 41 years. Upon his retirement, I suggested to the board that they consider putting an article before the town meeting voters to change that from elected to appointed, and they did. What they did was make it a more qualifications-based process, and we were very lucky that they did it. I was extremely proud of that. Another thing I did there were a few things in Hanson. We balanced the budget for all 3 years that I was there. The first year we had to use free cash, but we moved away from that practice within 2 years, and this year, knock on wood, we're not having to use free cash to balance the budget there again.
You came to Hanson at sort of a difficult fiscal time in our whole state, so
yeah.
You didn't get the last 3 years off very easy, it sounds like.
No, I didn't have, I had a very short honeymoon period there. We hit the ground running. We moved away from a lot of, what we did was professionalize the process in terms of the budgeting. Not that it was unprofessional before, but what we did was hone what we had, and got the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee really working together through what I have characterized as shuttle diplomacy, basically me running back and forth between meetings and explaining to them different viewpoints so that we had perfect alignment with all the columns for all the numbers for the budget. And it was a great experience. It was really hard to do, though. That first year, we were meeting probably 6 or 8 times a day trying to figure out the numbers within the course of 3 months, and doing contingency budgeting at least 60, 65 times, had different variables and scenarios based on where things were going, but it was a tough first year. But after that, things sort of leveled out and we did a lot better.
Well, hopefully we're getting out of the woods here.
It's not as quick as folks in our profession would like, but it's happening, and we're seeing upturns where we need to. So.
Now, one of the things that I've been doing is having coffees and a lot of type events like that to kind of be accessible and reach out to the public. And you've been doing that same thing for even longer, doing coffee and conversation with the town administrator.
Yeah, I wished I could take credit for it, but I can't. The treasurer collector in Hanson, Jean Sullivan, was the one who brought that to my attention. It was something that she read about through a publication that she receives in her office, and said, "What do you think of this idea?" I said, "I think it's great. It was a tremendous idea. It's a public outreach measure, and I think the folks really respond to it well. They like to see a name with a face rather than just read it in the paper and actually get to ask real questions. And I think it's worked out pretty well, and I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, no, I had office hours this morning, actually.
There you go.
No, you mentioned a name with a face. I just want to stop for a second there because your name is Rene Read,
yes.
And it's got a little accent on it. And I always for the first few months that I always kind of got it wrong. So maybe you could tell us how the name came and how you spell it and how it started.
My name, I was named after my uncle, Rene Blanchard. It's a French-Canadian name, and in English it's pronounced Rainy, but in French it's Rene. So it's depending on where I am. Like I'm originally
people call you Rene?
My friends in California, which is where I'm originally from, all call me Rene. But my friends back east all call me Rainy. So it's kind of funny because when they all get together, they all do one thing and they call me Read. They call me by my last name. It's sort of the universal cure-all. So,
well, Rainy seems much more East Coast. I don't know, Rene.
Yes, it is actually. Especially when I lived in Vermont, where I lived for 12 years. Everybody up there knew to pronounce it Rainy because there were a lot of French Canadians up there. So yeah, that's where it came from.
So it's the accent
going
up.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Got to make sure we get that right. So back to the coffees and conversations you have, what were kind of some of the issues that people would bring forward when you were down at the senior center?
Yes. Oh, they bring up everything. Many times I'll bring a guest with me. For instance, next week I'm bringing the assessors over so that they can explain how the senior tax abatement program works. Last month I brought over the police chief, the fire chief, and the highway surveyor so that they could meet them and see the people that were providing the services during the blizzard. They love it. The other things other people we brought in the water superintendent so that he could explain how water billing works and making sure everybody's got everything that they need. It's just a nice public outreach thing. We brought over the building commissioner, and all he did was take complaints one day, but that was great because he found out a whole bunch of zoning violations that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to fix. But it was fun. It's fun. They're a really nice group of people. That's great.
So now you're going to be following the footsteps of Richard McDonald, who's been the town manager in Duxbury for at least 6 or 7 years. And before that, he was the acting town manager. Before that, he was the building inspector. And he's been a well-liked and well-respected person. I know he thinks highly of you.
As I do of him.
I was actually with him the other day. We were touring Duxbury Beach to see some of the damage from the recent storms back in February, and he was speaking very highly of you. He's like, he sees you as his protege.
Yeah, so. and I've looked at him as a mentor, so it's a sort of a mutual adoration society. I've bounced different ideas off of him for years.
Because now you live in Duxbury, even though you're working in Hanson.
Yes,
and so that
it would be great because if I was on my way to my job in Mashpee, where I worked prior to Hanson, I'd stop by there in the morning on the way in and ask him something about whether it was budgeting or pay-as-you-throw or any of the things that I had seen working well in Duxbury. I wanted to use him as a resource, and he was very willing and able to do that. It was terrific. It's been a terrific working relationship.
Now, and what are some of the things that you maybe have borrowed or
we don't have enough time in this show to tell you what I've borrowed and begged for from Duxbury, but it started way back in when I was in Harwich, probably 8 or 9 years ago. One of the first things I did was use the ambulance billing policy of all things. We needed an ambulance billing policy. I used Duxbury's and it worked out beautifully. I've since mirrored that process in Mashpee and again in Hanson, and we use a similar thing.
What do you mean by that exactly?
There's a policy for obtaining people that may be delinquent on their payments for the ambulance billing, and by developing the policy we could find out the people that had owed money, and it was usually people from out of state that had required the ambulance service that just weren't paying, but we made it more stringent controls, tighter controls to be able to access their insurance to help defer the cost of running the ambulance. And again, it's mostly people from out of state that do it, but it was a great process and it worked out beautifully. Other things I've done, I've moved forward with a pay-as-you-throw program in Hanson. It hasn't been yet adopted, but we're using the Duxbury model as to how to do it.
It may happen this year, or is it down the road?
I hope so. It's part of the long-range financial plan for the town of Hanson. It will help defer the costs of running the transfer station, which right now are around $280,000. We could see that.
Just for folks who aren't familiar with pay-as-you-throw, can you explain how that process works?
Sure. Well, my experience first was in Duxbury, living with it, as many of the residents there do now, where we used to just throw all of our trash away. Now you buy a specific bag at a specific retailer, and you put your trash in one bag, and then you put your recyclables in another container. What it does is it drops the amount of solid waste that we have to pay for to haul and dispose of at CMAS or wherever it's taken, and it allows you to take your recycling out of the waste stream and reduce the volume of trash as opposed to the recycle, because on many of the recyclable materials we'll get money for that. Towns receive money. So what it does is it shifts it. Instead of having just everything thrown away, you see the trash numbers drop and the recycling go up, so it saves money over the long haul.
And for a resident, they're only paying for what they throw away.
Correct.
So the incentive there is
absolutely. It truly incentivizes, if you will, recycling. Otherwise, people still have the option to throw everything away, but they will pay for it through the purchase of the bags.
I remember when that came in, it was a few years ago.
Yeah.
There was a lot of apprehension about it.
Absolutely.
And I think now people think.
And admittedly, I was one of those people who wasn't crazy about it, but after having lived with it for 6 months or a year, I couldn't be a bigger fan.
It seems like a hassle when you don't.
It sure does. Yeah, because all of a sudden you've got to buy a special bag. What's that about? And then then all of a sudden you start doing with it. You live with it. You're like, my gosh, why didn't we do this 20 years ago? It's a terrific solution.
And I believe Duxbury combined that with the commingling of recyclables, which helped a lot.
Yeah, which was huge for the end user, folks like you and I that want to throw away our trash. In Hanson, we already have it separated where we do paper on one side and then plastics and cans on the other. So they've already got that foot in the door. So the cost of paying for commingling will be less, because they don't have to commingle. But yeah, it's a great program.
Now for Hanson, you know better than I. Hanson is a tier 1 town with CMS. Is that correct? So
yes.
We're going to be unfortunately looking at sort of a sticker shock in the near future. Is that correct?
Any of the communities in the Tier 1 sector will be. There are 15 of us. I've actually been working on the negotiations of the contract with CMAS for the last 4.5 years. It's something I carried over from Mashpee because they're one of the Tier 1 communities as well.
Can you explain that just for folks who aren't familiar with what Tier 1 means?
20 years ago, there was a group of communities, the Cape, several of the towns on the South Shore were part of a conglomerate that CMAS bargained with to get a contract to take the solid waste disposal, MSW. And I've forgotten, I just know it's solid waste, I've forgotten what the M means, excuse me. But so all these communities grouped together and signed a contract with CMAS to pay $34 a ton for trash. Well, over the course of the 20-year contract, the price of getting rid of trash has gone up significantly. Originally, we were all worried that it was going to triple because the contract comes due on December 31st of 2014. So we've been in the process of sitting down with a number of different vendors, CMAS, Waste Management, and an array of companies that handle municipal waste, to figure out what we could do to get a new contract. The next contract that I think we sign won't be a 20-year deal. It'll be more likely a 10-year deal, because the folks at CMAS found themselves losing money on this deal because of the life of the contract, because prices went up and down over the course of those 20 years. So I think we'll probably see a doubling in terms of the waste, the cost to get rid of the waste. Right now, again, it's $34 a ton, so I think it'll fall somewhere between the $65 and $75 a ton.
So if a town did not adopt something like pay as you throw, it would mean
they're going to pay the full freight. Whereas if you're paying now, if a community's paying, if we were to pay, let's say it was $75 a ton tomorrow, the idea is to try and drop the volume, and the way you can do that is to build up the recyclables, and the best way to do that, as far as I've seen, is through pay as you throw. So is this something that town meeting has to approve, or is it, can you do it? Actually,
or how does the Board of Health?
It's going to be, I believe it'll be done in concert with the Board of Health and the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
It doesn't need town meeting approval to do it. Okay. But we've got the town meeting authorization to enter into the contract with CMAS. We got that in October. So that negotiation will conclude hopefully by the time I leave Hanson, which will be May 6th. And then after that, then the boards can move forward with the adoption of a pay-as-you-throw program. It takes a few months to get it set up, but once it's up and running, it's terrific.
Great, great. So that's something you've got a couple months before you actually switch hats. What other kinds of things are you hoping to wrap up or get done before you?
Collective bargaining agreements is one thing. I've got negotiations with all of my unions actually next week. And we're trying to wrap all that up. I want to have everything in place. We're trying to do 3-year deals with the fire union, dispatchers, clerical union, and a couple others, and the highway union. We want to make sure I want to make sure everything's set in place for the next person coming in, so it'll be essentially a seamless transition. That was one of the reasons that I had spoken with the folks in Duxbury and asked. I have a 60-day provision in my contract, which allows me to give notice to my board 60 days prior to my departure. It's a little longer than that. It's probably 65, 70 days. But I had asked the folks in Duxbury, and they were very congenial about it. They said, sure, because I wanted to make sure that I could be there through town meeting, because I just didn't want to, I wanted to make sure that I could help shepherd the budget process through and make sure everything would be fine by the time I left. It'll make it a lot easier on the next person. It
will. We're going to take a quick break. You're watching Cutler Corner with State Representative Josh Cutler, and my guest is Rene Read, the Hanson Town Administrator, soon to be Duxbury Town Manager. We'll be right back.
Here's to the military, past and present, who honorably serve but are so much more. Here's to the moms and dads, the grandmas and grandpas. Here's to the athletes, the adventurous, the determined. Here's to those who have better things to do than worry about their benefits, because now there's e-benefits, where you can easily access and track all your VA and DoD benefits online, all in one place. Register for your free account today at ebenefits.va.gov. Then get back out there.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Representative Josh Cutler here with Cutler's Corner, and my guest again is Hanson Town Administrator Rene Read, soon to be Duxbury Town Manager. And where we left off, we were talking about town meeting, but I want to just to transition a little bit and tell us a little bit about your background, your family. You have your wife is Lee, and you have 2 young children. Tell us.
I'll go from there.
Yeah.
I'm 44 years old. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I was born and raised there.
You're older than me, but I have the gray hair. How does that? That doesn't seem quite fair.
I don't know. We won't get into that. Yeah, I lived in California for 21 years, and I moved back in 1989, a couple of years after my father passed away. My mother wanted to retire back east, which is where she was originally from, in Vermont, and so we lived in Vermont for 12 years. While I was up there attending the University of Vermont, I met my wife Lee, who was originally from Norwell. Here comes the connection to Massachusetts.
Right.
So we got married in '99. A couple of years before that, my mother had passed away, and we decided, well, I still have family in Vermont, but we decided we wanted to come down this way because all of her family's down here. She has a brother and a sister, and all of the rest of her family, her mother and father. So we decided, all right, let's make a home down here, because she was certainly familiar with the area. I wasn't, but that was okay because I wound up getting a job in Lancaster, and originally we moved to Natick. We lived there for a year, and then we moved to Norwell for another year, and then we wound up in Duxbury 11 years ago. So we've been in town 11 years.
So were you commuting from Duxbury down to the Cape when you were?
Yes, that was an interesting time. That was 50 miles one way from Duxbury to Harwich. And then when I went to Mashpee, it was 30 miles one way. So I do not miss that commute. And right now I'm going to have the commute of a lifetime.
How long is your commute going to be now?
I think it's about
3 minutes?
Yeah, I've timed it a couple times. I think it's about 3 or 4 minutes and 2 miles.
You live kind of in my neighborhood in Duxbury, so
it's wonderful. I can't wait. And I've earned it, I think, at least that part of the job. I'll tell you, that 50 miles for 5 years was a long time.
My commute just got a whole lot worse.
Yes,
into the state house.
But you can take public transportation on the way in.
I'm not complaining, nor are you.
No.
That's funny.
And I should add, we have 2 little boys. My oldest son, Nate, is 4, and Landon is 2.
Very good. So in a couple of years, Nate will be going off to Chandler?
Yeah, he's at the pre-K program right now, so he'll be starting kindergarten next year.
That's great. Now, one of the things, it probably cuts both ways, I suppose, but it's nice to have the person who's running the town manager or town administrator, be someone who lives in the town as well. Obviously, you get to see things.
I've often thought that as well, Josh. In fact, I was asked that during the interview process, what do you think about living in town? And I was asked that by a number of people, and originally I wasn't sure. When I lived in Vermont, I worked in a community next door. Here, right now, I'm working in a community 2 towns away. I think it'll be really nice, actually, because particularly when we go to town meeting and when we're discussing any of the articles, I've sat in the audience, as you have, prior to holding any office or any position, and sat there as a voter. I'll get to sit there as a voter this time, too, because everything that we're going to do at town meeting is going to affect me, it's going to affect you, and anybody else in the room. I think it's great. It's certainly more personal accountability. When we set a tax rate, it's going to impact us for real. It's not something that we do one day and then go home at night and say, gosh, I hope they can live with that. In this case, we're all going to have to live with it, and I think it's a great thing. Plus, I try to be out in the community as much as I can. My jobs have taken a lot of time on the weekends or in the evenings, so I couldn't be as involved in things in Duxbury as I'd like to, but I hope to be able to change that. I think it'll be nice. I try to go to as many community events as I can, but you know how it is sometimes swinging work, especially the kind of work we're in, where you have a lot of night meetings and things.
Yes.
But it's nice to be able to get out in the public during the course of the day and certainly on the weekends and say hi to people and run into people. I like that. So.
Do you find, are you concerned at all, that living in the town, you're obviously very accessible, and that can be good and occasionally it can be challenging.
My theory to start is to certainly have an open door policy at town hall. I've had that in every office I've worked in. I don't know if that'll work at home.
What does Lee think about this?
Lee might not be crazy about the open door policy at home.
People are now going to be lobbying Lee. Hey, how come Rene did this?
I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. But actually that was my primary concern. It wasn't so much for me because I'm used to living life in the public eye. You worry more about your family, well, gee whiz, what's going to happen with my wife or my kids? Are they going to see some kind of pressure with that? I think they'll be all right. Lee's known that I've done this for almost 20 years now, so it's nothing new to her. She would run into people that would have things to say and whatnot. But this time it'll be even closer to home. I mean, it is our home. So I think we'll be okay, though.
Now, the other thing, sometimes it's important to be able to get away, for yourself, just to have a mental break and so forth. that makes it a little bit tougher when you live in town. You really can never get away. I know talking to Richard McDonald, he would always, even when he was on vacation, he was constantly checking his BlackBerry.
I do the same thing. I do the same thing. I mean, if Lee and I find ourselves in Florida for a vacation or something, I'm usually looking at the phone here and there and try not to do it as much. But there are those times. Sometimes you go away and things happen and you've got to deal with them right away. She understands that. I mean, when you're the town manager or the town administrator, that's a job you do 24/7. It's not unlike. It's similar to a police chief or a fire chief. They're never not the chief. It's not like they punch out at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and they're not the police chief anymore. They still are.
4 a.m. phone call or whatever.
I think people are mindful of that these days, though. You know, they know that situations arise, but I think people try to be respectful and say, well, you know, this certainly can wait till the morning or something like that. But for the most part, if there's an emergency, you're there.
Now you mentioned we have some viewers in Pembroke, and you mentioned being out at community events. One thing our Pembroke town administrator Ed Thorne, who I'm sure you've gotten to know,
he's a great guy
as well, is does a great job. But he's also known for being very involved in actually wearing costumes at town events. I don't know if you've seen.
I did not know that.
Oh yes,
can't wait to see
He will show up. You know, he has a pirate outfit for one thing. For St. Patrick's Day, he's dressed in a different way. He's very good-hearted about getting involved in the community and wearing costumes that are appropriate.
Believe me, I'm all about that too. I like that as well.
I could never really get Richard to do that. He was more.
Oh, I see. I could totally do that. Okay. Halloween's my favorite holiday. Always has been since I was a little kid. In fact, I organized a couple Halloween parties in Mashpee and Harwich. One year I was a bishop. Another year I was a pirate. We go down the list of costumes, but I'm all about that.
Like for instance, in Pembroke, they have the duck races, down at the Herring Run, and Ed used to dress up as a Captain Quack.
Really?
Yes.
I'll have to borrow his thing for the duck races in Duxbury.
You can talk to him, and we can do that. But anyway, I did want to talk a little bit more about Duxbury now. So. So you're going to be taking over. It's obviously it's a different title, it's a different role, different responsibilities. Obviously, different people, and so forth. What do you see as the major differences between what you were doing in Hanson and what you will be doing in Duxbury?
Well, one of the major differences I see is the manner of reporting. There are some positions in Hanson right now that report directly to the Board of Selectmen, most notably the fire chief and the police chief. In Duxbury, they report to the town manager. So there's that structure right off the bat, which is an important thing to consider because with those positions, they are key public safety positions. So if there's an emergency, authority would be granted by the chairman, and it was a whole different hierarchical structure as opposed to Duxbury. So there'll be a couple of things that'll be challenging for me. Getting used to that change in organizational structure, although it's not unfamiliar to me, it's something I experienced in Mashpee, but it's been a couple of years, so it won't take long. It'll be a quick adjustment, I'm sure. One of the things I'm excited about Duxbury is working with the Fiscal Advisory Committee and the Finance Committee through John Madden, the Finance Director. I've been the Finance Director, but I've never had a finance director to work with, and boy, I'll tell you, I could have used one in Hanson. I'm really looking forward to that as well. I think John's a huge asset to the town. The conversations I've had with him, he's done masterful work.
He did a great job, as you know, during handling town meeting this past month.
Absolutely, he did a wonderful job, and I'm looking forward to working with him. And there's a few other department heads that I've met over the years, like Peter over in the DPW.
Peter Buckus,
Don Beers at the Harbor.
One of the nice things about Duxbury, as you know, and similar in Hanson, is that you have some folks who've been there a long time.
Yes, and that's
who bring this into institutional knowledge.
Yes, it's tremendous. And I'll tell you, when you sit where I sit and you see them go, in some cases, you are very sorry to see them go because they take all that institutional knowledge with them. So you try and glean off as much as you can. But there's some terrific department heads there. I've worked with Tom Connolly, in fact, the treasurer collector in Mashpee a few years ago. So there are some familiar faces there to me. Not all of them, but many of them. And I'm excited.
That's great. And so what are some of the issues that you foresee that you'll be tackling first out of the gate as a new Duxbury town manager?
This transition process has been great so far, working with Richard, because he and I are meeting on occasion, usually about once a week if we can, and he's updating me on things that he's doing. He's trying to have as many things finished and completed so that it'll be a smooth transition for me coming in there as well. And in the meantime, he's giving me some pointers on some things that he'd like to, that if he were going to stay, that he would have liked to have advanced. One of those things is, it's more of an internal measure for the employees, but dealing with information technology. That was one of my fortes in a couple of positions. I think that there needs to be a push, based on what I've learned from Richard, for town hall and interconnectivity between buildings and a lot of improvements there. I think it's a certainly a huge step in the right direction to do that, and it's an important thing because it is 2013. Technology should be at 2015
I can tell you,
or
taking
better.
off my hat as a host here and to lobby you as a town resident, as a former planning board member, we were trying to move towards a paperless system to cut down on, because being the planning board, we get these thick packets, and it just seems wasteful. So we're trying to work towards a paperless system, and we were sort of stymied because at town hall there's no Wi-Fi, there's no way to communicate electronically, and so you can't do that.
Right.
So if we were able to do that,
well, I'm definitely interested in looking at that.
Okay.
We
appreciate that.
No, not at all. I think it's a great idea.
And Richard was working on it as well. But
I know he was. I know. But let's face it, there are only so many things you can do in the day or during the course of your career. But that's definitely one of the things I'm going to try and do. I'm not looking to go in there and make waves. I'm looking to wade in the way a consultant might and take a look around and see what's going on and learn who people are, understand the system, learn the process, and know the people. That's what I did in Hanson, and it worked out pretty well. Although Hanson was a different scenario in that I had to be running and gunning immediately because of the timing of the budget. But this case, the budget season has passed. There'll be more time for me to do a lot deeper learning about the different systems in place, and then see how we can improve things as they are.
And it works out kind of well the way Duxbury has sort of an earlier time meeting and Hanson a little bit later.
Oh, it couldn't be better, actually.
Yeah.
Because the Duxbury budget has been set. Hanson will be done. It's a perfect time to transition.
Yeah.
So I think it'll work out well. Some of the other things I think that the town's going to need to know, figure out how to do. I know that there was the dredging article. That's one thing that's out there. Because the harbor hadn't been dredged in a while. That's something I had experience with in Harwich because we had 3 harbors there, so we did a lot of dredging quite often. I know that the fluoridation issue was a big concern for a lot of residents.
Discussion.
Yeah, it was.
But now, do you know, is Hanson have fluoride in water?
No, we don't.
You do not? Okay.
No. So that's something that certainly will be ongoing because that was kind of left, not open-ended, but there are other things to find out before they conclude that issue. Maintaining the schools. I mean, that's a huge issue. In Hanson, we were a regional school. We are a regional school district there, so we share the facility with Whitman. One of the things that they did early on was figure out security issues. And I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but when you have kids in the system, security at schools is a huge issue these days, especially in light of the tragic events in Connecticut. That's been a big issue with me for a long, long time. I had a police chief that I worked with in Harwich, who was one of the first responders at Columbine. He was the one that taught me how to deal with school security issues, and that is a huge, huge issue these days. Is it going to happen in Duxbury? We certainly hope not, and I'm sure the folks in Connecticut thought the same thing of their district too, but it's one of those things that's tremendously important to a lot of people, me included.
One of the things I know Richard worked especially hard on, and Rocco Longo before him, was improving relations and coordination between the town and the schools. Dr. Ben Tantillo, I'm sure that'll be something you'll. And
I haven't met him yet, but I've heard a lot of great things. I'm a huge fan of open communication.
I know. I just came from a meeting with Ruth Whitner, the superintendent at Whitman Hanson. I know she spoke highly of you and the relationship you had.
Ruth's a terrific person. Yeah, we've had a lot of fun together. And I had great working relationships with the school folks in Mashpee, where we had a school district there, and certainly in Harwich as well. Harwich was a lot of fun too. But yeah, we always kept the open door policy, and we'd go over there and meet with them, and they'd come meet with us. It works best that way, rather than I've seen some adversarial relationships, mediators involved, and I'm not about that. No, because we're all trying to row in the same direction.
Exactly. Well, Rene, there's a few things I wanted to get to. We've kind of run out of time, actually, unfortunately. So what I'm going to ask is if you'd be willing to come back on the show maybe a few months from now, after
anytime
you've had a few months under your belt, and kind of talk about what's been going on in
I'd be happy
Duxbury.
To. I'd be happy to. Then I have a little more information on how Duxbury's going.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. So cool. Well, I really appreciate this chance to talk. And
Thank you
again,
for having me.
I'm Representative Josh Cutler. You've been listening to Cutler Corner with new town and manager Rene Read. Thanks for tuning in.